Yo, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is BY Gaming, and today we are going to have basically a freestyle video where I kind of just talk about something that I noticed whilst playing this game and really how the game feels different. From the point in which I started playing to now, and really the quote-unquote truth of Monster Legends that really isn't spoken about. At least I haven't seen a video on this, and so I thought I would really just address it. So yeah, this is going to make for a pretty exciting video, and so I hope you guys will stick around for the bulk of the discussion. But before I begin getting into what I wanted to talk about, I want to remind you guys to please subscribe to the channel and please leave a like if you enjoyed it. Also, comment down in the comment section below what exactly it was that you enjoyed about the video, if there was something you enjoyed about it. Alright, so yeah, let's get into the video. So as I said before, the game feels really, really different now than it did when I first began playing it, like, 3.5 months ago? And I mean that in the sense of the game came off as this breeding kind of game, right? You got your Firesaur and like the Treezard, and you make all of these like monsters, right? And they have multiple elements and things like that. And I'd played games like this before. I played a lesser known game called Dragon Skies when I was in high school. And it was kind of like that. It was just combining elements and getting increasingly rare monsters. And I thought it was something like that, right? So, I'd been playing the game for a while, and I realized that it's like, oh, the rarities come into play. The more rare the monster is, the stronger it is. It kind of makes sense, right? I didn't know really much about anything when I played the game. And so I just started to gradually become aware of, okay, common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary, and then mythic, right? And I thought mythics were just far and away so rare that, it'd be a long time before I saw any of them. But, I eventually just started using monsters that had the rare symbol because they were, typically my strongest at the time. I had a Thundernix, I had Pandakin, and things like that, right? And, I would go through the dungeons, and that's back when the dungeons actually had some real punch to them. It's like I really didn't know how I was going to make it through the dungeons because, I was just getting into feeding. Food was scarce back then. I didn't know about Pandakin feeding, Pandakin farming, I mean. And so, everything was scarce, and I found it really difficult to progress in the dungeons, but it really gave me something to be excited about, right? Because I'm like, wow, and because I imagined that there were players who could easily sweep these dungeons, and I was right. And I'm just like, how do they do that, right? But it was like a real challenge. I would go through the dungeons, and there would be epic monsters and legendaries at rank, well, not rank, but level 90 or something. They'd say recommended level, and it'd be way higher than the monsters I had. And I knew nothing about the temples or anything like that. And so, it was really just kind of exciting. I was like, wow, I can't wait to see what waits for me when I get to that point. And so I just kept playing the game, and eventually I got my first mythic monster, which was Fey Malice, which was, I think, the first corrupted monster, right, that came out in February. And yeah, that was in the multiplayer mode, right? You just get the cells from the those little egg chests. And prior to getting Fey Malice, I actually struggled with the the adventure map, right? I actually had trouble with some of the nodes in the earlier islands. I really could not get past some of them because obviously they were really tough when I was only using rare monsters and stuff like that. So I really didn't know what I was doing. And once I got Fey Malice, I really started to kind of sweep the floor with some of these mini bosses and stuff like that. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy, right? And I'd also gotten some legendaries, things like that. I actually paid for Santirian in that Santirian food chest because I read that it was a really good monster. Do I regret it now? Kind of, because I realized that these monsters come back in breeding events, but I guess you live and you learn, right? But yeah, point being, I started getting mythic monsters, and obviously something quite predictable happened, which is that all of the monsters I used suddenly became completely irrelevant, right? Shortly after, I got the Pandakin, Sensei Pandakin from the Legends Pass, and obviously he's a pretty good monster even now, and all of a sudden, everything else in the game kind of ceased to be important. There was nothing that wasn't mythic that I could actually use with equal viability. It was just all mythics, you know, all mythics all day, you know? And so by that point, I started to realize that, oh, wow, you know, mythics are far and away like the most strong monsters in the game, and nothing else even really comes close. So all the breeding, all the collecting, and, you know, all the monsters I had, they basically became useless. You know what I mean? And so that dynamic of the game quickly died out. You know, all of the challenge elements, adventure map basically became useless because I also found out that I, you know, ought to not be leveling up too quickly so as to not make the challenges harder than they need to be, like the growth spurt challenges and whatever, right? Typically staying at a low level is good. And, you know, I just started to quickly realize that like the game was feeling totally different than it did in the start. In the start, it was like this really interesting, like collecting monsters kind of thing. And in a sense, it still is, but it's all about mythic monsters. You know what I mean? It's like, if you compare mythic monsters stat-wise to any other class of monster in this game, it is just, you know, it's far and away the strongest type of monster in the game. There's just no questioning that. If you go into PvP, it's like, and you start fighting your way to the top, you start getting to Legendary 2 and Legendary 1, you basically see all mythic monsters, and, you know, ideally from the corrupted era now, right? Because that's like the era that we're currently in, which means those monsters have the most updated stats. And so you basically see all mythic monsters, right? Occasionally you'll see like a War Master sprinkled in there, right? Like Elvira, and you'll see maybe Centurion or Mephisto use, you know, when they use it in that evasion combination, right? Megataunt evasion combination with a high attacker. But in general, I don't even see legendaries, right? But legendaries, they do have like a usage, right? You can use them to breed mythics and stuff like that, but still it's all about mythics. When it comes to combat, mythics are by far the most viable. They're literally, I would go as far to say, the only viable class of monster nowadays, because even legendaries don't stand a chance. They have crazy effects, the likes of which mythics don't, but mythics have ridiculous stats, like the highest attack power, the most speed, the most life, and so obviously it makes sense that you'll be using them. And so basically I noticed the transition from the game was kind of like an adventure-like game where like you started, you know, combining monsters, not knowing what you were going to get, to getting mythic monsters and realizing that literally nothing else matters. You know what I mean? That's the thing I noticed about Monster Legends, and that's what I guess you could say is the truth about Monster Legends, is that now the game is basically revolving around mythic monsters, and pretty much only mythic monsters. There's almost nothing else to the game that requires even legendaries, right? Like legendaries, I do have a bunch of them, but they're primarily just for breeding events and for gold production. So I don't really even use them. I don't use them in combat. You know, they're just sitting there. Even the legendaries, they don't come close to the mythics in terms of like combat and just raw power output and stuff like that. So they're basically just sitting there. And really the only thing that matters is that you have a lot of mythics. And now when, you know, new events come out, it's all about mythic monsters. Okay, there's a new Tales event. That's a mythic monster. The Golden Legends Pass, all mythic monsters, right? 3 new mythic monsters. Era Sagas, all about mythic monsters. What else? The Mazes. It's your chance to get a new mythic monster, right? And it just keeps on going. It's all about mythic monsters. And so I realized, you know, what used to be this adventurous, like breeding kind of game that had all this mystery behind it, it quickly became a game about collecting only mythic monsters and using them. And usually there's a hefty price behind getting the monsters, right? Usually it's like you have to watch a lot of videos in Monsterwood for a bunch of cells, you know, spend gems on like breedings to get the new monsters, and so on and so forth. Or spending real money to get mythic monsters in like the Bounty Hunt exclusive or whatever it may be, right? And so it basically just becomes all about that one specific class of monster, occasionally with legendaries sprinkled in there. And legendaries do have a part to play as well in like wars and stuff like that, right? Because when you fight wars, you also have what is it? Like there are book requirements or something like that, right? Where you can only use monsters that are located in a specific book in you know, in the library, right? You can check it out there. And so obviously if you're lacking a strong mythic, you can use like a maxed out legendary if you have one. But other than that, there's really like no other use besides breeding for legendaries, right? Like they're not viable, typically speaking, in combat. There's no reason I ever really even use a legendary monster in the game, pretty much, right? Like maybe there may be some rare cases, but in general, it's just all mythics. And that's literally the only thing the game has been concerned with for the last few months, as far as I can tell, right? And I wasn't around last year when Mythics came out, but for those of you who were, I feel like there might have been still some utility for Mythics, but for legendaries, but now it's pretty much all fallen away. And I can imagine that maybe some legendaries will get some Mythic remakes, but really now it's just all about Mythic monsters. It's about collecting these guys. These guys, like, nothing poses a challenge in terms of like the daily dungeons anymore, right? Those like food and gold dungeons and stuff like that, they're super easy to get through. Even like the cell dungeons, for the breedable monsters where you can use them to get legendaries, it's like none of that matters anymore. As soon as Mythics were introduced, the whole game basically became centered around this specific tier of monsters. And yeah, everything else just fell by the wayside. Like all these monsters in the Monsterpedia, or what do you call it, Monstergram, it's like all these monsters, aside from maybe, the races, which also deal with Mythic monsters, by the way, it's pretty much like, and you can, save their cells and like rank up monsters for requirements and stuff like that. There's really no use for them at all in the game in terms of combat. Once you've gotten to a point where, you've collected enough monsters, it's literally just about Mythic monsters. None of these monsters you see here matter anymore. And it's kind of sad because I remember playing the game in the beginning and it was so interesting, right? Because there was so many monsters. And, once you get Mythics, it's like literally everything just goes out the window. None of this stuff matters. It may as well just not even exist. And it really feels like I'm playing a totally different game. You know what I mean? Like the very beginning was all this mystery and like breeding, and monsters had multiple types. And now, obviously legendaries only have one type. And Mythics only have one type. And that's another reason why it feels kind of unfamiliar. But yeah, it just feels like they took a concept that was originally this way and they found something that worked, maybe business-wise as well when it came to Mythics, and they just kind of ran with that. And ever since then, the game has basically been revolving around only these types of monsters. And now, even when I get new monsters, it's all about these guys, right? It's all about getting new Mythics because they have the highest gold production as well as the highest damage output in life and all that stuff, right? So literally, if you're playing this game, I guess the truth of the matter is the game is going to feel totally different from, when you first begin to when you start getting your first Mythic monster. And you're really going to start scratching your head wondering, like, how did the game become so different? You know what I mean? It was like you had all these interesting, like, looking monsters and you just bred them. And it was all about, like, combining things and stuff like that. And then literally later, it's like, it doesn't matter. It's just, okay, collect Mythic monsters, wait for more to get released, pay some money, or, breed some pre-existing monsters, get some more Mythics, plant them in your yard, get some more gold, feed them up, and just rinse and repeat. And that's pretty much all it is. It seems like it's just a Mythic farming game now. And that's just what I noticed about it. Once you get Mythics, pretty much nothing else matters. Legendaries, they have extremely limited utility nowadays. In certain circumstances, they can be useful. But aside from these two classes, primarily Mythics and then also some Legendaries, there's pretty much no use for any other monsters in the game. It's crazy, but that's what I've noticed. And I'm sure that if you guys have played this game for long enough, you've also noticed that as well, right? Especially people who are veterans of the game, like people who have literally been there from day one, because I heard that this game came out in 2014. So anyone who's been there since the inception of this game probably feels like this, except even more magnified, because it's crazy, Like, I don't know, I think Mythics were introduced like a year ago or something like that. And so it's crazy to see, like, how much these monsters have shifted the focus of the game and how the game feels in general. Because it doesn't feel like just me waking up and having, mystery and like, mysterious things to kind of look forward to. It's more so about waking up, knowing that there's going to be a new event, and then just doing that, getting a monster, knowing I'll probably never use it, but then just putting it there anyway, and then waiting for them to come out with more Mythic monsters. And yeah, that's totally how I feel about this. And that's, I guess, what this rant is all about. Is just, yeah, the truth of Monster Legends. When you start playing it, it's going to be, it's going to come across a certain way. It's going to feel a certain way when you get certain monsters and you start starting to get the basics of combat down. And then you're just going to get your first Mythic monster and everything is just going to turn on its side. Like, that monster will be so much stronger than anything else you've ever felt. And it'll feel like you've been released, like your, chains have been broken or something like that. But then after a while, you'll literally realize that all these other monsters are just completely useless. They're just sitting there, and they may as well just not even exist almost. It's crazy to say, but since some of those monsters have been there for many years, right? But I guess that's just the truth of the matter. And so I just wanted to talk about this, and I guess that's the end of my rant. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment section below if any of you guys feel the same way or notice the same kind of thing. Leave a like, please subscribe as always, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.